Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and I'm back with another tag for a Tag Tuesday. So this is going to be the last 10 books tag. I'm going to try and do it relatively briskly, and I haven't been tagged in it as far as I know of, or if I have, it would have been probably a while ago. It was created by Mark Nash a good while ago now, and then it was revived recently, and I saw it this afternoon done by Brian at Bookish, so I will link to those two videos below once I've, organised myself this afternoon. And yeah, I was just looking out for a tag to do today, and this one looked like I could do it relatively quickly and easily, but it's quite fun. And it's also one that if you have done it before, you can definitely do it again, because the answers will have changed, because if you've read more books in between time, the answer will probably have changed. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about the books. So question number one is, what was the last book you didn't finish? And that's an issue because some books I haven't finished, but I'm intending to pick them up again. So I've left all of those ones aside. The last book that I didn't finish that I'm not really planning to pick up again is The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. So I started reading this in early December, and I had it as an audiobook. And when I was getting the audiobook, there were loads of really negative reviews that said that the narration was really bad and it was really hard to follow. But I thought, I'm not going to mind that too much. So I got it anyway, stupidly. And then I was trying to listen to it while I was in the gym, the place where I was staying in Lebanon, because we couldn't go outside for exercise. So I was in the gym trying to go on the treadmill and stuff, which is something that I hate anyway. And it was really hard to follow, and I listened to it for one session, and by the end of it I had absolutely no idea anything that had been said. So the next time I went down, I started watching this Lebanese TV series, very melodramatic and full of flair and everything, called Al Haiba, which is basically about the Lebanese mafia, and I got really into that series, and I never started listening to this again, and I honestly have no interest. I know that probably does the book a disservice, because the book is probably good. I've heard good things about it, that's why I wanted to read it, but I'm definitely not going to be returning to the audiobook. And to be honest, if I was going to buy the physical paper book, I'd probably want to go for something a little bit more up to date. I think this is about 5 years old now, roughly. Question number two, what was the last book that you reread? So the last book that I reread was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, and I mentioned this in a tag video last week when I did the spoiler tag, and I realised as I was talking about it that I could remember everything about the ending, all of the spoilery stuff that I could have said about the ending. I remembered it really clearly, but I couldn't remember why things had happened, and that just really started to bug me, and I was like, well, it's only going to take me a couple of hours, so I had a nice cosy reading evening, and I read this again, and it was enjoyable. I'm glad that I reread it. Question number three is, what was the last book that you bought? So the last book that I bought was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire, and this is a YA fantasy murder mystery story that I can't say too much about, because I actually bought it for my husband's birthday. He specially requested this specific book, and I bought it from a shop called Portal Books in York. So if you are in Yorkshire, I would highly recommend Portal Books, or if you're anywhere in the UK, because they can ship obviously anywhere at the moment. They're not open because of COVID. It's run by an online friend of mine called Lally, and they're just amazing, and it focuses on LGBTQ plus books, but they have quite a broad range, and they can also get hold of almost anything. So I'm going to put a link to Portal Books down below as well. But anyway, he asked for this book specifically, and I got it for him, and then I was looking for a short book to read, and so I read it before him, which is obviously very cheeky, but he did say that I could. It only took a couple of hours because it is very short. It's more like a novella, and you can see that's where his bookmark is. I'm thinking of doing a review of this on Thursday. Just because I have some things to say about it, I suppose. So question number four is, what was the last book you said you read but didn't? I know this happens to me because I know I kind of get carried away thinking that I've read things, and particularly things that I've heard people talk a lot about, or things that I think I read a while ago. But the one that this has probably most often happened to me, or most recently happened to me with, is the Iliad by Homer. And again, I held this up last week when I was talking about spoilers, but I haven't read all of this. I've read certain chapters repeatedly because I studied them for college, and then a few years ago I picked it up and started trying to read all the way through it, and I got to where that bookmark is, so not really super far through it. And then I kind of ground to a halt because I just didn't find it very engaging. I really enjoyed the language, but I didn't find it very engrossing. And the reason why I end up saying that I've read this is because it comes up in popular culture, people talk about it from time to time. I mention it on BookTube, and it's just easier to kind of pass it off as one that I've read, rather than explain, I know the whole plot and I know certain parts of it really well and I know the first half of it, but there's bits at the end that I don't know. Like, it's a bit long-winded, so I'm most likely to just say, like, not say that I've read it, but probably make it sound like I've read it, which is still, you know, slightly dishonest. When I mention it on BookTube, I'm more likely to try and clarify it, but if you're just having a conversation with somebody, it's just too much of a tangent. What is the last book that you wrote in the margins of? So this is my guidebook to Lebanon. I normally don't write in the margins of books. I don't think it's very nice for somebody who would have the book after you, just because I know that a lot of my books end up as secondhand books, and also books that aren't going to be secondhand, I like to keep them in a relatively good condition. They don't have to be perfect, but I don't want to irritate my later reading self by seeing all the notes that I made when I was in one mindset when I might be in a different mindset, if that makes sense. I know some people actually like that, to see their younger self's reflections, but that's not really me. The opposite to that is guidebooks, because I write in places that I've been to. I update the details. For instance, this is from 2016. A lot of it is quite out of date. One of my colleagues who was there before me, before he left, I asked him places that he'd been to, and then I wrote down tips that he had. It's in pencil, so you can't really see it. It's written in pencil, so somebody could rub it out if they wanted to. I've written down a taxi number for a taxi that he recommended, things like that. And I like to think that if somebody did have this after me, that would be useful to them rather than being upsetting to them. So guidebooks is somewhere where I definitely make that exception. And just being able to, sometimes guidebooks really oversell things because they like to make everything sound really interesting. So I know I've had guidebooks before where I've written in probably it's not as worth the trip, or it only takes such and such an amount of time to see, or conversely, I spent 5 hours here, just so that somebody else reading it will have a little bit of an idea of what's actually there, because sometimes guidebooks aren't incredibly accurate. Question number, whichever we're up to now, what was the last book that you had signed? So the last book that I had signed, probably the only book that I remember having signed in recent years, I don't know about as a kid, was Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light. I got this signed just before COVID restrictions kicked in, and it is beautifully signed, Matilda, all good wishes, Hilary Mantel. And I went down with Roz, and it was while we were doing Cromwellathon, and it was just a lovely memory and something I'm really glad that we did, even though I haven't finished this still. I feel like I've repeated a lot, held up a lot of the same books as last week. But yeah, that just fitted that prompt. I've not got any other signed books that I know of. What was the last book that you lost? This is a source of great guilt to me. The last book that I lost is a book called Taking Up Space by Chelsea Kwakye and Ogunbiyi. And that is a story about, a non-fiction book about young black women in education systems in the UK and the disadvantages that they face, and also, sources of strength and unity. It's more like an advice book, as much as anything, as much as a political statement. It's a mix. And one of my colleagues lent me this sort of summer last year, and really recommended it to me. So I took it and I read it and I tried to return it to her, and I took it into work, and I think about 5 times I was on shift with her and I had the book in my bag, but I didn't hand it to her. And I was so worried that was going to happen again, that I was I had it in my hand in work, and I was I need to give it to her. And I saw her bag, what I thought was her bag, in her locker, and I was to somebody, this is Katie's bags, right? And they were yeah. So I put it with her bag in her locker, but it turned out it wasn't her bag and it wasn't her locker, and the book was lost. And I said to her, look, I'll replace it for you. But she was somebody's going to have it. I'll post on Facebook to see if anyone's got it. And I don't use Facebook. So I was well, let me know if anyone gets back to you. And if not, I'll buy it for you, because, I lost your book. I owe it to you. And then before I spoke to her again, I left the job. So I, potentially completely lost her book, and then just left her without the book. It's really bad. It's criminal. That, like I said, I feel guilty. I do feel guilty. I shouldn't have lost the book. I should have just been a better book borrower than that. So I'm often quite reluctant to borrow books because I'm not very good, apparently, at returning them. So anyway, that's the last book that I lost. What was the last book that you had to replace? And I couldn't think of anything for this one, but then I realised that I have a massive list of books that I have to replace. So I've recently been doing a bit of a clear out. We just decorated one of our rooms and there was loads of papers and stuff, and I've been trying to throw some things out. And I went through a lot of my stuff from college, and I found that at that time it's illegal in the UK for teachers to photocopy certain amounts of stuff for educational purposes, which my English teacher definitely took full advantage of. And I had a whole box, basically, of photocopied versions of the texts that we studied. And I've never wanted to get rid of them because I study them, I care about them, I've got thoughts about them, and I just, I don't want to lose them. But it's ridiculous them taking up space in a box. I'm never going to reread them as copies like this, because I'm always going to want to read them as proper books. So I was like, okay, I'll just get rid of all of those and I'll buy them in physical books. By the time I'd collected all of the books that he had photocopied for us, and I made a list, and I went on secondhand books online, like World of Books, I think. It added up to over £60. So I haven't bought those yet, but those are the last books that I'm wanting to replace, I suppose. Like, I don't really know whether I'm going to do that and spend £60 on books, and then they'll be taking up space in the bookshelves instead of taking up spaces in boxes. But I do want these books, so it's difficult. It's very difficult. Or whether I should just buy like 2 a month or something until I've built the collection back up. So yeah, this one was Andrew O'Hagan's selected essays from the Atlantic Ocean. I forgot to put my phone on airplane mode, and my mum is just sending me like message after message after message. Stop, please. Should have put my phone on, turned off the internet. But she's messaging because I asked her what she thought was the answer to the next question, but then I came up with my own answer. So the next question number 9, is what was the last book that you had an argument over? Still more messages. Okay. The last book that I had an argument over, I struggled to think of something, but I have now, is Emma by Jane Austen. And I had an argument about this yesterday evening, in fact, so it's strange that it took me so long to remember. And I had an argument with Autumn de Wilde. Autumn de Wilde is the director of the 2020 adaptation of Emma. The thing is that Autumn wasn't actually involved in our argument. It was just me and my long-suffering husband sat next to me on the sofa, and the screen were having this argument. Mostly me was having the argument, really. But Autumn was the recipient of the argument, because, I just don't understand some of the choices that were made in that adaptation that were just really bad. And I did enjoy it. Parts of it were really funny. Parts of it they captured really well, but I felt like it's difficult because Emma is a very difficult character, and sometimes she's in many ways she's quite challenging and manipulative and quite bad in some ways. But that adaptation really successfully made her look quite toxic and made her look like a very manipulative and unpleasant person to be around, and somebody who's very controlling of her friend Harriet. And she is definitely, it's there. That's what's so upsetting. It's there in the text. She is controlling of her friend. But it comes from a better place in the book, and she doesn't kind of realise how unpleasant she's being, whereas in that film I felt like she was more self-aware of her actions and more negative in her reasoning, I suppose. And it came from more of a kind of a hollow, lonely, unpleasant place, as opposed to trying to be good-humoured. So that upset me. And then there was one scene that I thought they were doing kind of quite well. I was like, actually, yeah, this is getting me involved. I'm enjoying this scene. This is a nice romantic moment. And then she starts having a nosebleed. If you've watched the film, why? Why does that even happen? I just don't get it. And it specifically says in the book something about that. It specifically says that she had no intention of sacrificing her own happiness to promote the happiness of her friend. Not in that phrasing, but it definitely says in the book about that. But in the film, instead, they decided to do just an about turn on that and just make that be something that she did in a completely out of character way. So I was quite unhappy with that. It's I watched it last night because I knew that I had to watch it in the end, because I keep seeing videos pop up which Emma was best, or interviews with the cast of Emma 2020 and stuff. That's the kind of thing I get on my YouTube feed these days. So I knew I had to watch it because I had to get there eventually, but even from the trailer, I knew I wasn't going to like it, and I knew I wasn't going to kind of agree with the presentation, and there's no adaptation of Emma that can live up to 2009's adaptation with Romola Garai. But yeah, I was kind of even more frustrated than I expected to be in places. Last question. What was the last book that you couldn't get hold of? And the last book that I couldn't get hold of was A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, and I read that with my mum, Ros, Scully Dandling About the Books, for discussing drama last month. And initially we tried to get hold of it on the Kindle. We wanted to get it via like the Amazon Kindle bookshop thing, just so that we could both read it on the Kindle and it would be really convenient and easy. But it's not available, or didn't seem to be available as a Kindle edition. And this is, like, we're talking about one of the major works of American theatre, like a very significant play in terms of the context of history of literature around the topic of race in America, I think. From what I can understand, it was quite a significant play, but it's not available on Amazon, and it just makes you think, like, is this structural racism? Like, why is that play not available as a Kindle book when it is so significant and studied in school so often? It's really weird that we couldn't get that on a very major piece of ebook software, like that most people, like a lot of people use. It was available in other forms. We managed to get it as an online PDF, which was a little bit cheeky, but I think it's out of is it out of copyright? I don't know. Well, if it's not, then maybe I just got us into trouble. But anyway, we managed to get hold of it and we managed to read it, but I was sad that it wasn't possible to like get a copy to own, and it's definitely one that I'll be looking out for in secondhand bookshops and so on. Anyway, thank you to Mark Nash for creating this tag. I'm not tagging anyone because I'm bad at doing tags and tagging people and all of the tag related stuff, but I hope it was enjoyable, and if you've got any thoughts on any of these books, let me know in the comments down below. Have you ever lost a book that you've borrowed from somebody, and if so, what did you do? What reparations did you make? Yeah, and speak to you soon. Bye.